Centre for Health Protection holds last press briefing for now as pandemic eases. Government pandemic advisor outlines conditions for further relaxation of restrictions. Foreign ministers of China and the US hold talks in New York. Good evening and welcome to TVB News. The city reported 5,190 new COVID infections, continuing the recent downward trend. There were 152 imported cases. After today, the daily press briefing will be suspended until further notice. Dr. Chuang Shuk-kwan today thanked the public for the hard work to fight against the pandemic. Christy Khan reports.
The daily COVID tally has been hovering around the 5,000 mark over the past few days, with a declining trend. 8 residential care homes reported 14 positive cases. A total of 41 close contacts had to undergo quarantine. 4 schools have to suspend some classes for a week after more COVID infections were found. In view of the stabilizing epidemic situation, the daily COVID-19 press conference will be suspended starting tomorrow. But the authorities will continue to provide regular updates via the press release. In today's press briefing, reporters asked the Centre for Health Protection whether Hong Kong's COVID situation has become endemic. Dr. Chuang Shuk-kwan said it will depend on the global situation.
Currently, we have several thousands of cases. I think there is a very slim chance of having zero infection at the moment because it will have to wait until there will be no more cases around the world. From what we can see now, we will have to coexist with COVID for some time.
She added that further relaxation of anti-COVID measures will take place if there's room to do so.
I think the government and also the Bureau will be closely monitoring the situation in Hong Kong. If there is possible, it would announce new measures to relax.
Dr. Chuang said she hopes that this will be the last COVID-19 press briefing. At the end of the press conference, she thanked the public and other parties for their understanding and efforts in fighting the epidemic over the past 2 years. Christy Khan, TVB News.
After the authorities announced that hotel quarantine will be scrapped from next Monday, many Hong Kongers scrambled to renew their expired passports. The website for the online application for Hong Kong SAR passports experienced heavy traffic, and some users might have difficulties in accessing the page. According to the government, more than 900,000 Hong Kong SAR passports were expired. Apart from visiting the Immigration Tower and other branch offices across the territory, residents can also submit their applications through the internet. They can also use the Immigration Department's mobile application stations in 18 districts. Government pandemic advisor Professor Ivan Hung said the city could eventually cancel all quarantine restrictions for inbound travelers in weeks if the number of imported cases remains at a low level. This comes one day after Hong Kong scrapped hotel quarantine and replaced it with 3 days of medical surveillance. Starting Monday, quarantine arrangements for arrivals from overseas and Taiwan will be relaxed. Professor Ivan Hung, a government pandemic advisor, said today possible future relaxation will depend on the decline of daily infection numbers, the pressure on healthcare system, and the number of imported cases.
He said around
3% of the city's infections are imported cases, and if it stays at below 5%, then it's likely the medical surveillance period can be scrapped. Still, he stressed incoming travelers will still be required to do PCRs and RATs upon arrival and more tests on certain days. Hung added there will be room to relax social distancing measures locally if infections do not rebound, that is, remaining at the 5,000 mark. By then, patients may no longer have to self-isolate and the cap on wedding banquets may be lifted, he said. Still, he thinks it's important for the vaccine pass arrangement to remain, calling it the cornerstone of pandemic control. He said only when the World Health Organization announces the pandemic is over and that the city reaches a high vaccination rate, then Hong Kong can consider cancelling the requirement. And as the city's quarantine restrictions will be eased, foreign domestic helpers arriving on Monday will no longer be subject to hotel quarantine. They can work at their employer's home during the medical surveillance period. The Labour Department said foreign domestic helpers can perform activities with lower risks during the medical surveillance period, such as going to supermarkets and taking public transport. Another option for employers is to arrange hotels or hostels for foreign domestic helpers to undergo medical surveillance and self-monitoring. For that option, employers do not have to apply to the Labour Department, but they must pay for the accommodation, meal allowance, and the helpers' wages. 3 people were arrested yesterday for allegedly misleading police officers with false information at a bar in Tsim Sha Tsui. 2 staff from the bar were arrested on suspicion of providing rapid antigen test kits with negative results to customers and allegedly breaching the CAP 599F regulations. During the operation, a 25-year-old customer was also arrested for misleading police officers by presenting another person's negative rapid antigen test result. Macau's chief executive Ho Yat-seng today said the city is planning to reopen and receive mainland tour groups starting November. Ho said the central government has approved the resumption of travel between Macau and the mainland. The city's chief added that visitors from Guangdong, Fujian, Jiangsu, Zhejiang and Shanghai will be the first group to be allowed to come to the city. But Macau authorities have no plan to further relax border control measures with Hong Kong currently. Foreign Minister Wang met with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on the sidelines of the 77th United Nations General Assembly in New York. This as part of ongoing efforts by Beijing and Washington to maintain open lines of communication and manage competition responsibly. Daniel Rao tells us more.
During the talks, Foreign Minister Wang Yi told U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken that China-U.S. relations are at a critical juncture. Wang said it is imperative for the 2 major countries to adopt the right approach to getting along with each other and to work to stop bilateral ties from further deterioration. He warned the U.S. over its recent actions regarding Taiwan, which saw U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visit the island. Wang said the Taiwan issue is China's internal affair and the United States has no right to interfere in the way the Taiwan issue is resolved. Blinken noted U.S.-China relations are in a difficult situation and bringing bilateral relations back on a stable track is in the interests of both sides. Blinken said that the U.S. side is willing to engage in candid communication and dialogue with China. He added that Washington does not seek a new Cold War, has not changed its one-China policy, and does not support Taiwan independence. Before his meeting with Foreign Minister Wang Yi, Blinken held a meeting with Quad members Australia, India and Japan. The U.S. Secretary of State and his Quad counterparts signed an agreement on humanitarian aid coordination. Ahead of signing the agreement, Blinken heralded the unity among the Quad members.
I think our 4 countries know very well that the significant challenges that we face, as well as the opportunities that are before us, demand more than ever that we work together. No one of us alone can do what is necessary to meet these challenges and seize these opportunities. And that's the inspiration behind the Quad.
The last meeting of Quad leaders in May in Japan was dominated by discussions about Taiwan. This after U.S. President Joe Biden said he would be willing to use force to defend the island. Daniel Rao, TVB News.
Looking to reintroduce the Philippines to the world, new President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has plans for his nation on the international stage as well as at home.
We do not want to return to whatever it is we were doing pre-pandemic. We want to be able to be involved and be vital part of the new global economy of the new global political situation and to position the Philippines so that we are in a good place to take advantage of what opportunities that we can avail of.
Marcos, 65, was speaking on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly on Friday. Marcos wants to strengthen ties with both the United States and China, a delicate balancing act for the Southeast Asian nation. Still ahead on tonight's news, Housing Secretary vows to speed up the construction of public housing. Britain's mini-budget draws critical reactions in markets. Votings and referendums have begun in Russia-controlled regions of Ukraine. Welcome back. Secretary for Housing Winnie Ho said she's looking into ways to speed up the completion of public housing projects. The housing chief wants to gradually reduce the number of small units in the future, adding the chief executive will announce relevant measures in the upcoming policy address. Secretary for Housing Winnie Ho said early next month she will submit a housing policy report to Chief Executive John Lee upon reaching 100 days in office. The CE would then consider announcing it in his policy address next month. The previous administration were able to secure land to build some 330,000 public housing units that will be able to cope with the demand over the next decade. Winnie Ho said authorities will find ways to speed up the completion of these units in the next 5 years. In the sale of recent subsidized home schemes, Ho noted there were comments saying small units were not that popular, so the authorities are working on adjusting the number of these units. But Ho suggested the smaller units may suit buyers who could only afford to pay cheaper down payments. Today, Ho was at Wong Tai Sin to host the groundbreaking ceremony for a transitional housing project. Some 200 units are expected to be built in mid-2023 at a site near the Wong Tai Sin Temple. Meanwhile, the city's first modular social housing project on Nam Cheong Street has ended its 2-year operation period. But less than 30% of its tenants were given a public housing unit, meaning the remaining residents will have to find a new home until they are allocated one. The housing secretary said she is looking for a solution to the issue. Ho added she was told by the organization operating those units that the project's budget was too tight. She said the authorities are considering the appropriate measures to take. Overseas, the UK's new government has outlined plans to cut taxes and boost spending in an effort to improve the nation's economy and address its ongoing cost of living crisis. The markets reacted promptly. The pound experienced its biggest drop against the US dollar since March 18, 2020, as critics warned against the perils of funding the measure with massive amounts of borrowing. Daniel Rao has details.
The so-called mini-budget unveiled by Britain's new Conservative government reversed many of the initiatives announced by former Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his Tory predecessors. Chancellor of the Exchequer Kwasi Kwarteng announced that he was cancelling an increase in national insurance taxes that Johnson introduced in May to boost spending on health and social care. Among other key parts of the plan, Kwarteng also said the government would cut the UK's basic rate of income tax to 19% next year from 20%. Furthermore, the top rate will drop to 40% from 45%. Kwarteng cancelled a planned 6 percentage point increase in Britain's corporate tax rate, leaving it at 19%.
High tax rates damage Britain's competitiveness. They reduce the incentive to work, to invest and to start a business. And the higher the tax, the more ways people seek to avoid them, or work elsewhere, or simply work less, rather than putting their time and effort to more creative and productive ends.
Kwarteng announced new investment zones across England where the government will offer tax cuts for businesses and help create jobs. He added the government would accelerate dozens of major new infrastructure projects. However, many economists said the Conservative government is taking a huge risk by allowing massive amounts of borrowing at a time when the UK's economy is weak and inflation is high. Analysts speculate that the policies of Prime Minister Liz Truss's government will push borrowing to £190 billion this fiscal year. That's a sharp increase from the £99 billion that the Office for Budget Responsibility had forecast in March. Furthermore, the announcement of the mini-budget triggered the pound's biggest drop against the US dollar since March 18, 2020, when then Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced the first nationwide lockdown to clamp down on the spread of COVID. The opposition Labour Party attacked the plan for favouring the interests of business over working people and failing to provide any figures on its impact on government fiscal targets. Other parliamentary critics have accused the Conservative Party of avoiding scrutiny by implementing a major shift in economic policy without the normal analysis from the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility. Chancellor of the Exchequer Kwasi Kwarteng said a full economic and fiscal forecast will be published before the end of the year. Daniel, TVB News.
Voting has begun in Moscow-controlled regions of Ukraine on referendums to become part of Russia. Meanwhile, Russians are heading for the borders to escape Putin's mobilization order. Tracy Furness has more.
The Kremlin-orchestrated referendum got underway Friday in the occupied regions of Ukraine. The votes are being held in Luhansk, Kherson, partly controlled Zaporizhia and Donetsk regions and are almost certain to go Russia's way. But some Mariupol residents remain positive about where their future lies. Everything will be fine with God's help. Everyone will come back. We will build our city. Perspectives will be much better than under Ukraine. That's my view. Moscow's appointed head of the Donetsk region, Denis Pushilin, released a video of himself casting a ballot on his official Telegram channel. He said residents understood that the only right way is towards Russia. For Donbass, it's connected only with the Great Russia. But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky remains defiant. Zelensky said the world will react appropriately to the pseudo-referendums, adding they will be condemned. He said these are not just crimes against international law and Ukraine law, but crimes against people. For a second day since Russian President Vladimir Putin announced that 300,000 people will be mobilized to help fight the war in Ukraine, borders have been busy. This traffic queue is at the border between Russia and Georgia and extends 10 kilometers. To avoid the queues, some are even cycling over the border. Russian citizen Roman Issev said that in Russia, orders are coming to everyone. People don't know who will receive an order, and therefore they decided for the time being to rest and enjoy Georgian food and wait a little while. And Maxim says, it's not that we are afraid. The matter is our dislike for this situation. I don't like what they're doing in Ukraine. I feel sorry for our brother Ukrainians. I have many relatives in Ukraine, and I do not like this at all. Other destinations for Russians fleeing mobilization by land or by air include Mongolia, Turkey, Armenia, and Finland. Tracy Furness, TVB News.
Protests continued overnight across Iran amid an explosion of outrage after the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini in police custody this month. Amini was detained on September 13 for allegedly wearing her hijab or head covering too loosely. She died 3 days later in police custody. Authorities said she had a heart attack but hadn't been harmed. Her family disputed the claim, leading to the public outcry. Videos filmed late on Friday showed security forces shooting at protesters as demonstrators could be seen chanting anti-government slogans and putting up barricades. Protests have taken place in more than a dozen cities in Iran. At least 11 people have been killed so far. The Iranian government has clamped down on internet access in a bid to halt the unrest. U.S. President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden surprised singer-songwriter Elton John Friday while he was performing at the White House as part of his farewell tour. The musician had previously refused to play for Donald Trump's inauguration.
Tonight, it's my great honor, and I mean this sincerely, to present the National Humanities Medal to Sir Elton John.
Sir Elton seemed overcome by the accolades, telling the audience of 2,000 people, "I don't know what to say." He said that he'd played some beautiful venues, but the stage in front of the White House beneath a massive open-air tent on a perfect autumn day was the icing on the cake. And that's the news for tonight. Thanks for watching.